Go ahead and get us started this morning. Thank you so much for joining us for Coffee with the Coalition. We have a great presentation today. It's titled Leading Trauma-Informed Agencies. Before we get into it, I'm going to get into a couple of Zoom tips so that we know how to navigate our call today. So if you need to access captions at any time, there is a big black bar at the bottom of your screen. And if you click on more, it should generate a menu for you to activate the captions. If at any point you need to change your display names, again, you'll revisit that big black menu bar at the bottom, click on participants, find your name or whatever you logged in with. And if you right click, you will be able to change your display name. If at any point you would like to connect with our presenter, or if you have a question or anything like that, you're more than welcome to use the raise hand feature so that we can navigate our conversation today. You can also utilize the chat box to ask questions or share your thoughts throughout our presentation. If at any point you need technical assistance, please message me directly at info@ICESA and I will do my best to assist you today. And the last thing, today's session will be recorded. So just a few housekeeping things before we get started. But I would like to welcome our presenters today. We are joined by Amy Turner. Amy is a licensed professional clinical counselor with over a decade of experience working at the intersection of trauma and power-based violence. She collaborated with Reverend Tracy Simmons, who's a clinical marriage and family therapist, who also has experience working with and supporting sexual assault and domestic abuse survivors. So they've collaborated on this presentation today. Unfortunately, Tracy was not able to join us today, but Amy will be taking us through it. So what I will do is pass the airwaves on over to Amy, and she will get us started. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you all for letting me be here today. I'm really sorry that Tracy couldn't be here. She had a death in the family, and so we couldn't. She wanted to, but family takes priority over work. That is something that we believe, and we kind of talk about that a little bit in this presentation. So there are parts of it that are definitely more of her voice. We worked on the content together. We presented this content together. But let me share my screen and we can get started. Feel free to ask questions whenever. Put them in the chat box, raise your hand. I will try my best to pay attention to both. But sometimes the brain does not work that way. So if I'm a little less not as on top of getting to you, know that I am paying attention and trying. We all good? Can we see the screen? I've done my technology for the day. Okay. This this presentation, we do talk. We use the word leadership a lot, but we do believe that leadership is there's a leader in every seat, not just a person who has leadership by title. So when I say that a lot, please don't think that I'm not talking about somebody who's not in a by title leadership position. So this is a little bit about me. I'm currently in private practice as a therapist, educator, and consultant. Also a yoga instructor. For the last 3.5 years, I worked at our Kentucky State Coalition as the Access Healing Coordinator. And then before that, I worked at one of our centers as their Director of Sexual Assault and Prevention Services. CWF means the Center for Women and Families. I sometimes forget that people in other states don't know what we're talking about when we use our own acronyms. KSAP is the Kentucky Association of Sexual Assault Programming. I'm originally from Fairdale, Kentucky. I currently live in Louisville. And, I went to college and I do a lot of things. You can read the screen. But I come with over 20 years of doing this work, over a decade working with the coalition in our centers in Kentucky. So for a little bit of a check-in, as we all know, we work in trauma, and as humans, we experience trauma, and we're, currently experiencing in the world the way that it is today. So just as a universal precaution, know that everybody in here has seen some things, heard some things, been through some things, and we're just going to honor that space here today. And we talk about trauma-informed leadership and agencies because of that universal precaution, because of what we're doing as advocates, as people doing this work, but also as humans, and that having a trauma-informed agency really prospers people and makes the work better. So we end up doing better at our jobs when we are informed of the trauma that we experience, not just the trauma that we work with. Group agreements. This is a safe and brave space. So not every space is safe, not every space is brave, but this is a space that you can feel free to ask questions. It's okay no question is dumb. Um, if you misinterpret something or need some more clarification, feel free and feel in a safe space to ask those questions and ask for that clarification. That you can feel free to share what you need to share, that we're all agreeing that this space is safe and brave to make those steps. And that is also because this is a Vegas style room. What happens in here stays in here. So what's said in here by participants stays in this group. You feel free to share whatever I say. I'm more than willing to share the PowerPoint with you. You can share the information you learn, but don't share the information that other people share. Move up means if you are a person who is like me and doesn't often participate in large group conversations, even though I am presenting I am a very shy person, a very introverted person. So in large group settings, I don't tend to participate in discussions. And this is usually when I make a joke about Tracy being a preacher, and that if you're like her and really enjoy talking to people and talking in large groups, maybe you take a step back. But it's not as funny when she's not here. And Elmo is enough, let's move on. Sometimes we got to land the plane. We only have 90 minutes in here. I wish we could spend a lot more time together, but we only have 90 minutes. So if I skip a hand or if we move on from a topic, it's nothing against you. It's just time. Um, and our goals of this, I'm sure you've read them before, hopefully you read them before you signed up, is that just understanding what transactional transformation leadership is and being able to identify those styles and just ways and opportunities to engage in some transformational leadership and trauma-informed care. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. We all probably know a definition of trauma-informed care, coming from agencies that practice that, have touted that for a very long time. It's how what I talked about in the previous slide of like, we've all seen things, been through things, and obviously people who are coming to our care have experienced some sort of trauma. I mean, obviously some power-based violence and probably many other things along with it, because being a human is traumatic in and of itself. So trauma informed just recognizes the presence of trauma and symptoms, and also recognizes that trauma plays a role in how we approach life, how we make decisions, how we operate inside the world, and not just in the world at large outside of the vocational placement. But how we are as staff members. And so we believe that trauma informed centers not only experience trauma from the work that we do, but also by the people we work with and often by our leadership. Okay. So what do some of you think about what trauma informed like leadership means and being a trauma informed agency? What does that mean to you all? Oops, not yet. You can go ahead and just unmute, shout out some answers. You can put it in the chat, whichever you feel most comfortable with.
Considering the experience of the people that you're working with and being sensitive to that and supportive of that.
Absolutely. There's no wrong answers, I promise.
For my own experience, being a shoulder, being somebody to lean on, an ear that listens, even look, I know where you're coming from. I've been there too, or so such and such has happened to me also, and this is how I cope. Or, have you tried this? Um, that's what I've noticed in my role that I've played.
Those are some very good answers, and that's definitely what it is. And trauma-informed leadership, a trauma-informed agency, is kind of, I feel like I repeat myself just a bunch in these first few slides, is it's understanding that as humans that navigate the world, that we experience trauma. Most of us who come to this work are survivors ourselves or have really close relationships with survivors. And we come to this work because of that. That has empowered the beginning of our work. May not empower it now, may not be the reason that we're still in the work, but it's definitely a reason that we came to it. And so it's understanding that we experience trauma as humans, and we're also hearing trauma every day from the people that we work with. We're hearing trauma every day out in the world. If you've watched the news or scrolled social media yet this morning, you've probably experienced some trauma already. So it's just that understanding and putting that understanding into practice. So the first form of leadership that we're going to talk about today is transactional leadership. And has anybody seen The Office and would get this reference of, okay, good. This doesn't really work as a reference if people haven't seen it. But transactional leadership is the process in which a leader or there is a system of rewards and punishment for the behavior of other people. This also works with our clients too. This is, I see a lot of transactional kind of exchange with clients that if you do A, B, and C, you'll get this as a reward. But if you don't do A, B, and C, you're not going to be able to get this. So obviously if you come to work, you get paid. If you don't, you won't. Even though we do have a process of PTO and things like that are in place where you still get paid. And if you miss work too often, you get fired. And essentially, it's management rather than leading people. Um, and so some symptoms of transactional leadership is turnover, a lack of professional development, and also promotion, more calling out, less accountability, and then a collective disturbance and a buildup of resentment. Instead of there's not this kind of culture of feedback and accountability, oftentimes there will be a collective disturbance and collective resentment because there isn't a place to have that kind of conversation. And trauma-informed agencies have an environment of feedback and conversation and accountability so that the resentment doesn't grow. There is a place to talk about hurt feelings, um, disagreement, discussion of how to do things in a different way. And so it's the collective disturbance doesn't grow. Some examples of a transactional leadership is a performance improvement plan, or you might hear me say a PIP. That's what we used to call it. And this is a way to achieve desired behavior from somebody and a manager believes is essential. Not to say that PIPs aren't necessary sometimes, depending on the behavior. Um, expecting to complete tasks that aren't on the job description. And if not, you're going to be on this PIP to fulfill that. Performance evaluations are tied to movement and raises. But not talking about growth opportunities. And the intent is to have power over instead of a shared power. An example of this that we talk about is, this is an example from the center. It does not work this way anymore. From incidents like this, we changed that. But at one point in time, the center is a dual agency, so it does domestic violence and sexual assault. And our crisis line on second shift, so starting at 2 o'clock, they also worked in shelter. So they were answering phones and working in shelter. And the center is in one of the most populated counties in Kentucky, and it is not uncommon to get 4,000 calls in a month. And also 211 was answered on our call center line. So they were getting multiple calls a day, and especially during COVID, when people were looking for resources. So we were getting more 211 calls than we were getting violence calls. And so somebody who was working on the phone, an advocate who was working on the phone, missed some calls because there was an incident in shelter. And it happened over a couple of days. And the manager went in and was like, "You're not doing this well. Like, this is your expectation. You're not fulfilling this expectation." And the conversation, instead of approaching it in a way of like, what's going on that we're missing calls? What's happening that we're missing calls? It was more of blame of like, what are you doing that we're missing calls? Instead of what's going on, and asking that question. And eventually, after this happening for like a few months in a row, we decided that we needed to beef up our crisis line and our shelter advocates and separate that position so that people could attend to, as we know, people in residential and shelter have high needs, and that it just wasn't conducive to do both at the same time. And we missed less calls, and we had more attention to people who were in shelter who had needs that needed to be met. Transformational leadership, which is what we're hoping to go for, is leadership that changes people, it inspires, it causes growth, and it not only just in like team morale and agency morale, but in like motivation to do the work. And it helps people pursue goals and be more mission minded as a team. Um, it develops a relationship between leadership and advocates or employees. I don't know what you all call your people. By tapping into values and understanding values versus task, and showing them where their values align with the mission and what we're trying to do. And it's not based on reward and punishment, but by sharing values as a team, and as in, individual teams, but also team as an agency, like where different values work in different settings, different values work in different positions. And I know sometimes, and we talk about this a little bit more later, when it comes to places where like there is performance issues or behaviors in which a PIP or some sort of consequence is needed, being able to go back to that values conversation makes it a lot easier than having to do some sort of consequence. Obviously, we need consequences. This isn't like really like what we see as gentle parenting on social media or something like that. This isn't just forgiveness and letting people run, wild. It is being more value and mission aligned. And so when there are those places of behaviors, we can go back to those values. And if those values aren't there anymore, sometimes it becomes a coaching to coach them into going in somewhere else. Because if your values are not aligned with your agency anymore, this isn't the place for you. And also normalizing that and validating that that's okay. Sometimes you transition and move on. The work is just over for you. So transformational is recognizing, like I said, recognizing talents and being strength-based, and creative solutions for behaviors that are problematic, aren't ideal, aren't aligned with what's going on. So burnout, difficult client interactions, being late, calling out, all of those things that we tend to punish in a lot of different ways, finding creative solutions for that. And offering like individualized support. I know that this is a lot to ask sometimes for leaders, because I know when I was a leader, when I was director at the center, I was also doing the work, and that's it's a heavy job, and sometimes providing individual support can be hard and feel like that job gets bigger. Um, but obviously it's within boundaries, but everybody needs something different. And the example we use is a real example. There was a client that was calling out a lot, or not a client, an employee that was calling out a lot. It was happening, several weeks in a row where they would call out at least once a week. And so having a conversation with them about, they were a single parent, um, and they worked third shift, and it's really hard to find childcare for third shifters. And it's hard. Their daycare, we don't have 24-hour daycares here in Kentucky, at least not in Jefferson County. I imagine they're not in the rural counties either. Um, and there wasn't a lot of family support. And so it was finding ways to best do that and maneuver through that. For a while, we were able to manage with PRN staff on days that she couldn't get childcare. We planned ahead. But then eventually um, we got to a place where we weren't able to do that anymore. And so it was, having the conversation about values and like, what is your values personally and how they match with the agency? And she ended up moving to a different agency where she could get a day shift job. We did try to switch her. We just didn't have the open positions to switch her to a day shift job. And so she ended up moving, and she was much happier. It was a very amicable separation. It was just, we did all the resources that we could do, and then ended up finding someplace else for her. And so a lot of this is it's also like treating leadership and advocates the way that you want to be treated as a leader, and also how advocates can expect you as a leader to treat them. So having an open door policy, being able to have conversations about things, very open, very real discussions about things, a space for decompression. We were able, fortunately, with space, to have a room that no client went into, that had, like, I put snacks in there. We had a coffee machine and tea. We had a refrigerator for water and other cold drinks. We had comfortable furniture. The lighting was nice, coloring books and all that kind of stuff. We were able to do it. That isn't always available for other people, but sometimes it does not have to be physical space for decompression, but providing that space for them for decompression and teaching them how to build that into schedule, and also yourself build that into your own schedule, that space for decompression. Thinking about your environment, not only physically, but what is the environment like mentally? There's some things we can't control environment wise. Um, like, I know at the center it was loud. It was very chaotic sometimes. We did have a 75 bed shelter that was consistently full. We had clients in and out all the time. We had tours in and out all the time. And so there wasn't a ton of control that we could do with the environment physically or mentally, but it was providing that space and that permission. A lot of this is just permission to do things that work for you. Is it doing, like, I had a few advocates that did their notes in a coffee shop before they came in we would split their shift up, and they could come in, they could do their notes and then come in for their actual shift into the building. Even though that was working, it was part of their whole shift. But being able to be in a different physical environment because it was too loud, or they shared an office with somebody and they needed more quiet, providing headphones, those kinds of things. And I know a lot of us, when we talk about self-care, we talk about it in the beginning. We're like, when we hire people and we do onboarding and we talk about self-care, but then we never check in on it. Um, we don't provide space for it. We don't advocate for it. And also, like, the different means of self-care, like having conversations with advocates about, other committees or projects that are going on in the agency, and giving them permission to say no to things, giving yourself permission, even as a leader, to say no to things that like you don't have the capacity to do that. That is self-care. Obviously, there are boundaries around that, given projects and job descriptions and stuff like that, but having the ability to do that. Yeah, Jessica, I see your hand up.
Yes, I have a question about this whole self-care.
Mhm.
So, my business is called Grace to Grow Corporation, and I haven't started hosting any kind of groups yet, but I have several people that I talk to. My question is the self-care after group sessions, because I know that hearing other people's stories oftentimes triggers me, and I need to decompress too. And so, what are some tips, tools, tricks to do some self-care after these sessions?
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good question. When I would talk, like as a therapist and having done this work for a long time, like I would talk to our therapists and our advocates about like hard sessions or groups. Sometimes sitting with just one client for an hour can feel like a lot, let alone do a group. So it's like, what can you do in the next few minutes after you're done before so you can leave the building a person and not be distracted on your drive home or so it's what do you need in the immediate. A lot of people would do like funny YouTube videos. They would take a walk around the building if it was obviously wasn't very late. Sometimes they would go, like they would schedule um supervision with me afterwards. If obviously if it wasn't in the evenings or the next morning, um, to talk about things and be able to process stuff. So there is a difference between like coping and self-care. And sometimes we intertwine those two things. Coping is dealing with it in the moment, and then self-care is what you do afterwards. And also like what you do for yourself all the time. So like saying no to things is self-care, but also is like eating nutritiously and drinking water. Um, so it's like what can you do to cope immediately afterwards? What feels good to you? Um, and then what is part of your daily life? What brings you joy in your daily life that you can do as self-care, knowing that you're going to need it after these sessions. So like what works best? Because some people aren't, I'm not a journaler, so journaling doesn't work for me. Neither does quiet meditation. My brain wanders too much. It's just not for me. It's not for everybody. Something works for everyone, but not everything works for everybody. Um, and so, like today I have clients until 7 p.m. So um, I planned yesterday for dinner tonight, so I didn't have to think about it too much. Um, I have my break scheduled throughout the day, and um, and also like I made sure that I don't have any heavy tasks for today, other than those sessions. And this and those sessions are all I have going on. Um, I'm not expecting too much from myself today, and so that is a lot of times what I would advise people to do is, on these days that you have group and it's going to be heavy, or um, like you have your heavy clients this day, schedule ahead of time. Pre-planning is self-care. And so finding something to immediately cope and get your brain off of it and separate yourself from that moment, but then also what brings you joy throughout the week, what's going to be best for you after this throughout the week.
Thanks, Amy. That was very helpful.
You're welcome. Anytime. Um, yeah, that was a really good question. I think that's something that when we talk about self-care, when we first start with people, um, we don't check in about it and we don't check in with ourselves about it either. Like, I know myself and I know all of us have been in those places where um, we just get into like the grind of everything, and we get into the tasks and into the mode of all of completing everything and checking off as much of our to-do list as we can, that we forget ourselves. And then you get to a point where you act out in some sort of way, or you get so burnt out that like you realize it's Sunday afternoon and you haven't moved from your couch, or haven't like showered or changed your clothes, we kind of like lose ourselves. And so it's planning those things and checking in on that often, not only with yourself. Like I don't have my calendar at the table with me, but I put all of the things in my daily, weekly calendar of these are all the things I'm going to do for myself this week. Here are all the tasks I have to complete. How do I balance those things? Like I know that today I'm not going to get anything other than the appointments that are on my schedule today done. I'm not going to be able to do anything else. I won't have the capacity. But I do have time for it tomorrow. So I'll do those things tomorrow. Today, just take care of myself. And so keep checking in on those things. We like the work is done by us. Our work is us. I know that we're not doing physical manual labor, but we're doing a lot of mental manual labor as helpers, and that we don't check in on ourselves. And so, um, and we have at the bottom here, like those are those who are hurt, help people, and helping hurt. The job that we have does hurt, not all the time, but a lot of the time. So again, promote the care of yourself. So there is the separation between self-care and coping. I think I've talked about that. But coping is what you do in the moment. Coping is what you do between sessions, or during session, um, or during group or whatever. Self-care is all the time. It is the stuff that's in your schedule all the time. Um, some of it's not always bubble baths and pedicures. Sometimes it's, oh, I haven't drank water at all today, or like, I haven't taken care of myself, whatever that looks like. Um, and then soothing goes along with coping too. It's what just like helps you keep going through the day. And mindfulness, being very aware of what's going on in your body, what's going on in your mind, where you're holding things, what's happening, um, being mindful of where reactions are coming from, what you're thinking about, um, what um, what is going through your head, and then also building resilience. And I think we often get resilience and survivorship confused. And sometimes like resilience is um going to basketball practice after losing a tournament. It's you know um going back and doing things again even though like um it's something may not be working, or you may have failed something, but keep going back and keep trying. Sometimes some of our environments, especially our professional environments, believe that um, coming back into similar behaviors and enduring um, abuse, for lack of a better word, is isn't survivorship. A lot of times we are surviving our professional environments. We aren't being resilient um, because our environments are not changing. Resilience isn't doing something despite the environment not changing. Resilience is being able to overcome an obstacle and continuing to move on, whatever that obstacle is. A lot of times, our environments, a lot of times, our leadership does not see that what they're doing is abusive behaviors that are causing most of us to just survive, not necessarily be resilient. So, caring for yourself is not a before or after an event, and it is before, after, and during, and ongoing. So before, making sure that you come rested, which I know is really hard. Um, deep breathing, being mindful of what's going on, where your limitations are that day. Sometimes you're not showing up with 100% of yourself. And so don't have a 100% expectations for yourself if you're not at 100%. If you're at 70%, have 70% expectations of yourself. Daring is, drinking water, relaxing, taking a break if you have to, or if you're able to. Um, Obviously, I've never walked out during a therapy session because that would be very jarring for clients. But I have taken or had a break during a group if there was a really difficult discussion. I've been like, hey, why don't we take like 10 minutes and you can go outside and smoke, you can grab some water or coffee, or there's snacks over there. Let's take 10 minutes to kind of regroup ourselves because that was a really hard discussion. And I needed to and afterwards taking a break, listening to music, talking to a supportive coworker or even your supervisor if you feel like that is a supportive environment. And then ongoing is like spending time with your protective factors. What are the restorative, resilient factors that you have built, the protective factors that you have built into your own life, whatever that is? It may not be spending time with people. That may not be your thing. I am an introvert. I recoup a lot on my own, but I do have community and enjoy it. Taking care of yourself, eating well, meditation or whatever, spiritual practices, whatever kind of brings you back into yourself. Um, I think a lot of times we sacrifice ourselves to this work too. And we don't need to do that. We don't need to spend ourselves to do the work that we do. So some things to do. Do dual evaluations. When I was at the center, the supervisor on my team and I did this. So we have performance evals. I'm sure you all have a system of that too. And we did it on the team for each other and also for the team to the leaderships to us as leaders. We just made a Google form that had the same questions that our performance evals did. They could have their names on them. They could be anonymous, whichever they felt most comfortable doing. And then that way they could review each other's performance. Um, what are some areas of growth for them? What do they do really well? I don't think we always talk about what we're doing really well. We are so often pointing out our own failures and shortcomings, but not talking about the things that we do really well. And it was very helpful. We got really good feedback from our staff and our team. Of being able to do that. So hearing what their team felt about them and their performance and them as a partner in this work. And also it helped us as leaders. Like some of the feedback I got was that I was gone too often. And as a director, I was like, a lot of us in leadership are in meetings and I was also doing the work. So I was in sessions or doing hospital runs. And so redoing my schedule to provide more space and time for people, being more present when I did have that time instead of thinking about what I had to do or what was on my to-do list that day. And it's helped informed how I work now that like I do provide myself with space and time to be present in the moment. Having a leader in every seat. This is a philosophy that the supervisor on my team, Jill, and I believed about our team that everybody was leaders. And we were also eventually training them to take our positions. At least that was the goal. We had weekly team meetings where feedback was normal and it was normalized for people because there's a difference between feedback and criticism. Feedback has action steps, has ways of improvement, what would work better, what wouldn't. And that was a culture of our team, was to being able to feedback, having reviews after every group with each other and check-ins, after doing any sort of public education or group together, either immediately after if we could, or the next day. There was a planned conversation of what worked, what didn't, and planning for next time. And so it created a culture on the team and with my staff on their own time, and also with Jill and I talking as leaders to where feedback was welcome and accepted versus seen as like somebody being ridiculed. It was as improvement, it was healthy communication, teaching healthy communication across teams, how to communicate with each other, what works and what doesn't. And everybody has different communication styles. So understanding what those are and then how to do that with each other. Um, like, please don't text me and say that you need to talk. I automatically assume the worst. Um, but if you say, like, can we have a conversation about this? I'm much less on the defensive about it. Um, and a call up or call out to call up. So holding account, like having accountability is important. Um, obviously we don't want a lot of behaviors. We want people to be happy and healthy in their jobs. We also want them to learn and improve. And so having that accountability, and it's a back and forth. So if I were to I hate to use a word like fail, but if I didn't stay up to the expectation of me as a leader, um, to someone, having that conversation, and like I wasn't there as they needed me to be, holding me accountable to that, talking about how this can improve for next time, or like having that conversation with the employee who was struggling with childcare and balancing the workplace. It's, these are the expectations. How can we do that? And we did that for so long until we couldn't anymore. And so, the accountability to doing the work and the accountability to that employee was making sure that they were able to support themselves and their children. But also we had to do this work. And so like when those values and that accountability doesn't match, then obviously there needs to be some sort of different way of doing things. And it's done in a way that is positive and it's not seen as like a failure on either side. It's just these things just don't match anymore. So internal personal development. So boosting knowledge by teaching each other. We built this into our weekly team meetings. We also had other times in which I had really brilliant advocates and I've worked with really brilliant people. And so we've done this at KSAP. We did it on our team where we teach each other things. We train each other on how to do things. If there's knowledge that somebody comes in with, giving them that space to teach other people how to do that, especially if they're really interested in doing it. Like, Tracy is really good at curriculum development and how to work a room and do a training. And so she did like a 6-week training course on that at the center with our team. Um, they kind of organized it themselves. I gave them the space to do so, but teaching each other how to do that. Some people went to external trainings and brought that training and trained our team on the information that they brought back. So it's also creating that leader and boosting that leader in every seat mentality that myself or Jill as the supervisor weren't the only leaders in the room, and that everybody on this team is a leader, maybe not by title, but definitely by personality, by knowledge, we're leaders. Placing value on external trainings. I know that sometimes, especially right now, they feel kind of cumbersome to do. But having an emphasis on doing those, even if it is something online or, not necessarily having to travel, but something that they can do from their office or from their home, it's putting value in enhancing their skills, putting value in enhancing our own skills. As people, sometimes we get stunted by position and we don't grow. But placing value in growth, like we should be, eternal students of what we're doing. Creative partnerships, connecting with community and organizations in really fun ways. Because we know as people who work in power-based violence that it touches everyone. We connected one of the like coolest partnerships we had while I was at the center was with a boys chess team, like a high school boys chess team. It was a community-based team. They were from high schools all over the place. We actually met the two gentlemen who are the heads of it by while we were all out on a team lunch. We saw them playing chess, started a conversation with them, turned into this partnership where we were able to do prevention work with these boys who were coming into to learn chess. Um, it's finding the leaders in communities and who to connect with. Some of our best partnerships were, grandmothers who sat on front porches all the time and knew everybody in the community, who knew everything that was going on. Um, and so developing partnerships with them that wasn't necessarily an exchange of services, but they felt more of a connection to us as an agency. So when something was going on in the community, there was a bridge built. A lot of times, I know it was true for us at the center, there were communities that we didn't work well with because we had been in and out and in and out. And if it wasn't service based, um, there wasn't cultivating of that partnership. So finding value in connecting with people, and then also team building. Um, I will admit, and Tracy would tell you this too, that I really hated team building activities. Um, like just wasn't my thing. I'm all for hanging out, but I, don't want to do like, um, some cute, like guess somebody's nickname from childhood game. Not my thing. I would participate because the team wanted to, but offering space for bonding and relationship building. So sometimes that meant like luckily we had it in our budget. Some of these things, I know our budget concerns, but we would have team lunches like once a month. Um, we had a couple of team outings once but a couple times a year. Um, we would small fractions of our team, like we had people who, therapists would all go do something together, advocates would do something together, our education team would do something together. We would do stuff as teams. Having the team meeting, sometimes it wasn't just like, here's everything that's going on in the agency. This is all the stuff I need you all to do. Sometimes it was just conversations of, having a space to talk about things that were going on in our community that were affecting us as people and growing that bond and personal connection with each other. And also participating in things together, like during the protests around the murder of Breonna Taylor. Because that happened here in Louisville, it happened right here around us, um, went to the marches together. They went to Injustice Square together, as a team, as representation of what we do. Not everybody is able to do that. I know that there are some very strict boundaries around that in some organizations. We were able to do that. But it not only created a bond on our team, but also created a bond with those individuals who did that together, and also with the community, showing up when it matters, not just if it's sexual assault or domestic violence, but showing up in other times when it matters. Calling in Black, this is what Tracy, this is a slide that usually Tracy did. She actually did call in Black once to me. I was her boss at one point in time. And it's understanding that experiences outside of us or outside of our agency trump what we do, the work that we do, and understanding the kind of urgency of that. This was during that time of right after the murder of Breonna Taylor, and then we had another community member, David McAtee, who was murdered by the National Guard, and it was also right in the middle, like our center was right in the middle of where all of this was happening. And so it made coming to work very hard for her. We had very transparent discussions about how she was feeling at the time, and also being in a mostly white agency and how that felt, especially during this time. And so, she did call in Black one day. I totally understood. I was like, we don't, um, you don't have to explain it to me. Hey, go ahead, Beth.
I'm sorry to interrupt this
You're
discussion
fine.
because it's really important, but I wanted to, before we moved on from the notion of team building and ways to build relationship, there's a question in the chat about how do you do that with a 24-hour staffing structure?
Oh,
And I
that's
think
a
that's an
very good
important
question.
logistical question I'd like to get to. So thank you very much.
No problem. Our team was 24/7 because we did hospital advocacy, and that is a 24-hour job. Um, and obviously, it was hard to do it as a whole team. Um, so sometimes we would do things, we had to get a little creative so that way the second shift and third shift teams were around the team as a whole. So some things would happen at the end of third shift and the beginning of first. So sometimes that would be breakfast. And um, obviously, second shift staff couldn't do that, but our first and third shift staff would have breakfast together, um, do coffee together. Um, we would do team building activities together. And we had um, even like our therapists and stuff would come to that. Having kind of, for lack of a better term, expectation of, we do this work together, even with our third shifters and our second shifters. So we would plan things like that. Sometimes when we would do our two whole team things a year, we would get PRN staff to cover second and third shift. Um, so that they could participate in that. And you obviously, like, I would have to talk about to our executive leadership and tell them we were doing that. But all of our teams that were 24 hours did that too. So it wasn't like requesting special permission. But some of our smaller things, um, our second shift started at 2, so they were overlapping with third shift anyway, or with first shift anyway. So we would do like a late lunch or something like that. Or have people come in early and they could leave a little bit earlier to do something with the first shift. And then on our two big outings as whole teams, we would get PRN staff. So that way everybody could participate in those bigger things together. And whenever we would plan anything, it was always at those, the smaller things were always at those overlapping times. Which often meant that like Jill and I were participating in both because we would overlap. We would try to make sure that that was all done in one day, and that everybody could participate in some way. So there were some logistical things. It did take planning. It couldn't be spur of the moment, obviously, but we did our best to try and make sure that we included everybody. And that came from feedback from our second and third shifters, because the agency as a whole would do stuff at like noon. And so it really only benefited um, people who were there during first shift. And so when we did things as a team, we were just very cognizant of this has to be during these times and overlap as much as possible. So it does take some, there were a lot of flip chart papers, making sure that timing wise, we had everybody accounted for. But once we got the hang of it, it was pretty easy. And we also we had some PRN staff that were regulars for us, and we included them on our big team meetings. So we would get some PRN staff that didn't necessarily work with us very often. But we had some second and third shift PRN people who only did hospital runs. And so they were included as part of the team, even though they weren't full time. Sometimes they were. It felt like they were. Some of them had worked there longer than I did and knew way more than I did. But it's a logistical feat, but we prioritize having all shifts participate. That's a very good question. Thank you for that. Um, so Also, like, I really hate the term diversity hiring because it feels very tokenizing, but um, something that Jill and I were very aware of, and we also included the team in hiring when we didn't have a lot of turnover on our team, luckily. Um, but if we had new positions, or obviously there were people who, left. I had people who left to go to school and that kind of stuff. Does our team reflect accurately reflect the community in which we serve? Um, so, do we have people who speak different languages on our team? Do we have representation of the Black and Brown community? Do we have immigrant representation? Do we have queer representation? Do we hire men? Um, and we did have um, a couple of men who worked on our DV team, not on ours. It was really hard to make that work because a lot of our clients didn't feel comfortable. So it was thinking about that. But we did have men who participated in our education team and who were wonderful and did really well at that. Not necessarily did really well at direct service, not because of ability, but mostly just for comfortability, what worked best for everyone. But like Louisville has one of the highest resettlements, second to Miami, of Cuban and other Latino communities. And so, do we have people who speak Spanish? And we made sure that like we kind of not only looked at those and like brought those resumes to the top, but are we advertising our positions in those places? Um, and, we got really creative in where we not only was it where the agency itself posted the position, but going to immigrant communities and posting the job, going to the local universities and um, master's programs and stuff like that, advertising jobs that would require that, and going to just diversifying like our job positions and where they were posted so to attract other people. And sometimes it was going to those creative partnerships and saying like, hey, we have this position, where should we post it? Do you know somebody who may be interested? Going to community centers, stuff like that. And also changing, like we advocated really hard to not have a bachelor's degree be a requirement for a position. It took a long time and a lot of debating, and I'll use that instead of argue, and persuading. Um, but a lot of people, we finally got to where bachelor degree does not equal experience. It took a while, it took a couple years, but we got. And then also addressing social justice issues across, because I know I've said this several times throughout this presentation that, people who come into our centers, not only as employees or as clients, experience everything in the world. And their experience with violence affects everything in their world too. So how they relate to these things. So showing up in times not only when a sexual assault has happened or domestic violence has happened, but showing up in these other areas where um, we know that there are survivors there. Like it was going to Injustice Square. It was being part of the marches that we had in 2020 that we've had now, going to those and showing up to those. And so that we weren't only a face at the hospital or at school or in these other like professional settings, that we were part of the community. And that is trauma informed. Being trauma informed is being part of community and understanding that our work is woven together. It's not separate. That sexual assault is not the only thing that these people that sounds bad, but that our community is dealing with. That domestic violence is not the only thing that we're dealing with. I know that all of our individual communities are experiencing very different things. But it's showing up in those times. It's, you know, showing up at harm reduction rallies. We have had a lot of those in Louisville recently. It's showing up for teachers in Frankfurt when they were negotiating their contracts. It was showing up for the queer community. It was showing up, as laws, and I know they've probably happened in Indiana too, but definitely have happened in Kentucky when laws were passed, shrinking rights of our trans folks and other queer folks, that just showing up for that. Because as we know that when these things happen in our community, violence rates increase, that this gives way to these things to increase. And so showing up in those moments matters just as much as showing up when an assault happens. So importance of organizational culture. So understanding that sometimes policy and procedures, the stakeholders, values, our mission statements do not fully account for, as we say, the way things work around here. Does the mission statement do what we say it does? Do our values align with the way that we're doing the work? Do they reflect the needs of the people that we serve? Are they written in a trauma-informed way? I know it's really hard to rewrite a mission statement and your values and, rewriting a policy manual is not my idea of a good time. But having a regular review of those. I know at the center, and we do at KSAP too, we review those once a year. And not all of them once a year. We go through different policies at different times. What does the dress code say? What does that look like? I know that we kind of navigated social media in a different way. But what do these written practices look like compared to day-to-day operations? When are they utilized? Sometimes value statements only come to play when we're being punitive to people. So I think being trauma informed is having value discussions often. Where do our values align with our mission statement? Where do we align with our values? And that's part of the reason that I left the center was my values at that time did not align with how they were doing the work. And, as luck would have it, there was a position at the coalition that opened up that did align with my values. And I moved. So, sometimes that helps you navigate when and how you stay. But also approaching all of that work with a trauma-informed lens that, where is this policy coming from? What is it exactly attaching itself to? Is it activated by an event that's happened at our center? You know, what is inappropriate versus appropriate? Where are we getting those definitions? So having some really deep and honest discussions about where these policies come from and that they actually reflect what we're doing. If our mission statement says one thing and our value systems say one thing, but that's not how we're executing the work, then maybe those need to change, or we need to change to better align with those. The don'ts. Trauma porn culture. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this phrase, but we call trauma porn, where we got this term from, was exploiting survivors and their stories for monetary gain. I know and understand that survivor stories are important. And I had several survivors that I currently work with and have worked with that wanted to tell their story. They wanted to talk about, the work that they had done with a therapist or that they had done with an advocate or, whatever that helped them along the way, or how the crisis line is super important to them because who else is there at 3 in the morning when you're having nightmares but a crisis line? Um, but it's, how we use those and why we're using them. And being very intentional and trauma minded about having somebody share their story. Um, how is it benefiting them? Um, like we created a structure where if a survivor shared their story, we gave them some sort of payment. It wasn't always very much. Um, because obviously nonprofits, we don't make a lot of money or have a lot of money to share. But gift cards, providing them food, if they did something in the evenings, um, providing them with care before and during and after sharing their story. So creating a culture where they're not exploited again. And especially by a place that is providing help. Um, Culturally insensitive and incompetent marketing. So again, just kind of weaving with that, using sometimes we would use different people's stories depending on what was going on in the community. So it would then make us look like we were relevant in some other things that were going on, but not being sensitive to what that might have meant for that survivor. Um, using pictures on our marketing material, like brochures and stuff like that, that depicted people in different ways. Um, like, um, how we talk, especially domestic violence and sexual assault, like be careful about the images that you use. Um, and also talking about communications, both internal and external. Um, One of the examples that I use is, I mean, obviously working in violence, um, death is something that happens. And we had a survivor who had been in our shelter who went, was able to leave, had a safe place, and then was murdered by her ex-partner. Um, And it was a very traumatic experience for our whole center because everybody had worked with her. She had been she had gone to therapy on the sexual assault team. She was also a hospital run. She lived in shelter. She had been with us I want to say she was in shelter for 6 months, 6-ish months. And, like she was such like, everybody knew her. She was such a common face. Like everybody had a relationship with her. And so her death really hurt our staff very, very much. Like it was really hard to go through. And it was also very public. And so not only were we hearing about it and talking about it in the agency, but we were also hearing about it and talking about it outside. Like my parents knew about it, it was on the news. So it was just really hard. And then on the year anniversary, they did a social media post about it and did not warn anybody. So, people checked their social media before they came into work or, while they were at work. I don't judge. And saw it, had big reactions. And it was a really hard conversation with our executive leadership and communications team about like how that, like just a warning, just an email the day before that says like, hey, it's the year anniversary. Her family had asked us to make a statement, a post about it, because there was a fundraiser attached to it with the family, which everybody was for. Like nobody was against that, but having some sort of like, hey, heads up, this is going to be on social media in the morning. Um, just so so you're prepared that maybe you don't look at it. Or when you're scrolling through and you do see it, you're going to see a picture of her um and just having that kind of heads up and warning about things that were going on. Um, on the year anniversary of George Floyd, on the year anniversary of Breonna Taylor, there were suddenly posters everywhere that next day. And there hadn't been posters up in the meantime. And so it was having these conversations of like, you can't pick and choose. One, you can't just celebrate anniversaries to continue to seem relevant, but also warning, you know, we work in a trauma environment, and that was jarring for a lot of people to come in and see all of this when we're already kind of dealing with this as people in the world and as people in this agency. So it's having that
Hello?
universal precaution that I talked about in
Yes.
the beginning. Oh, does somebody have a
I'm
question?
fine, thanks.
Oh. Um, but having that universal precaution that everybody is experiencing something, and as people, that we're not just here and have no experience of the world. Withholding and dishonest and having open communication and healthy communication is so important as a trauma-informed agency. We have to balance discretion with gatekeeping. Um, when situations would come up, um, like policy changes, changes within the agency, like reorgs or something like that. How do we, because there's obviously conversations we have as leaders that we don't necessarily give all the information to outright, but keeping people in the loop of what's happening. One, to settle anxiety as much as we can, but not acting like we don't know information. I always, like in our team meetings, would say, like, this is where we are so far. These are, you know, pieces or solutions we're discussing. What does that look like for you all? What is some feedback you have on that? I had one of our therapists who had been at the agency for 25 years. And so she was a person who I would ask often, has this happened before? Has this solution happened before? What worked, what didn't? And so having that balance of, I don't want to up your anxiety as people doing the work, but I also don't want to withhold information and keep you from trusting me. But then don't make decisions about programs without feedback and taking in the account of knowledge of those who are doing the work on the ground. Um, you know, we had a conversation when we were kind of rebalancing how shifts worked, and we ended up doing third shift as um, 4 10-hour shifts instead of 5 8-hour shifts, because it gave an extra day for folks. But then it left one day where somebody was on the crisis line by themselves overnight, and shelter was upstairs. Hospital advocates were at the hospital most of the time. And so this left this advocate by themselves on the first floor. And it was having the conversation of what happens if they need to go to the bathroom? What happens for their breaks? What happens if somebody gets in the building? Because that can happen. We were pretty well locked down, but anything could happen. Anything was possible. And so having that conversation with those advocates about how would we balance this? What would work best for you? What would make you feel most comfortable? And so having that feedback while we made those big logistical decisions. And also, like, don't ignore the feedback and suggestions. Don't ignore what your advocates, what your staff is telling you. Don't ignore what other like leadership is telling you about how something may or may not work. And duality of being a service provider and also being a perpetrator of some behaviors, understanding power and control dynamics, not only within staff, but also with our clients, because there is a power and control dynamic, even if we try to bring it as down as we possibly can. Understanding vicarious trauma. I mentioned before that a lot of us come to this work as survivors or having close relationships with survivors, and how hearing what we're hearing in sessions, experiencing what we're experiencing, doing the work, and also some behaviors from leadership that can cause a lot of vicarious trauma. Um, Financial abuse, so understanding um, how money decisions can really impact our staff. Um, Having a work-life balance and encouraging that. I mean, I obviously can't enforce it, but some people are just going to do what they do. But um, encouraging that and not making people feel like they're not working enough when they choose themselves, and choose their time that is theirs, and also just the overall lack of trauma-informed care. Um, Sometimes, and I said this earlier, when we get into the work, we get kind of tunnel vision and we drop that trauma-informed care, not only with ourselves, but with our clients. And not only does that provide, distrust in the community, but it provides distrust within the organization. All right. I think we've gotten towards the end. Are there any questions that are lingering?
I've got one.
Okay.
So my goal is to host support groups for men and women who are survivors of sexual assault. And I was
Mhm.
going to hold them separate, a man's group, a women's group. Um, where is there material for men? Because I've got women all day long. I can help support women, no problem, because I am a woman. But how do you support men who have that as a part of their history?
Um, we didn't have a separate men's group. We had a mixed group and a women's group because we didn't have a ton of men seeking services. Um, but we, um, as staff, talked to our male clients. We also talked to male staff who were more likely to get disclosures from other men than we were as women. So we had a couple educators who were men, we know got disclosures from the community and from students. And so just asking, um, is there something that we need to provide differently? Um, Different kind of discussions that we need to have, um, and what would work best. And we did a lot more research with doing men's groups or having men intermingled in a mixed group. Um, and um, Before we did, or than we do with women's groups. Um, that, especially not being men, it's hard to put yourself in that kind of position. And most of us were, um, harmed by men. So sometimes it's hard to remove that bias that men are also harmed. Um, but we did a lot more research and um, not only from men who were doing the work alongside us, but men who were receiving um, individual services.
All right, because I know some guys in my area who have been assaulted by women, but they've also been assaulted by men too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a really complicated,
Yes.
um, and like I used to work primarily with men as a therapist, um, so like it is more complicated. Emotionally, it's more complicated, because they're also like men are conditioned to not talk about certain things. Uh,
Absolutely.
and so providing an environment that allowed people to share and felt, like covering confidentiality was a much more lengthy conversation than it had been with women.
I like your terms safe and brave.
Mhm. Yeah. And also knowing that like nothing's recorded.
Right.
Like, um, like if I took notes, I do this with my clients now. Like if you see me writing during session, a lot of times it's more of information for me to remember something. So like to talk about something maybe for next group or next session. But this notebook is locked up. Nobody reads it. It doesn't go in your file. And when it's done, it's shredded. When the notebook is full, I shred it. Um, and so that way they knew that there was, a lot of privacy. It's like I don't really write anybody's names down. A lot of times it's just for me to remember something that's said so I don't interrupt you, or an idea has been shared with between several of you, and that seems like something we should talk about next session, and I'm reminding myself to research that between sessions.
Good points.
Yeah. Any other questions? Unshare my screen. If you don't have any other, I will put my email address in the chat. So that way, if you do um, have any questions, feel free to email me anything that comes up. It doesn't have to be today. It can be if you think of something, a month from now. Feel free to email me and I will definitely help you out. Even if it is to brainstorm, we can Zoom or something like that too.